The massive hall went dead silent the instant the final vote was tallied, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press against the walls themselves. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood rigid at the human delegation's table. Her fingers curled so tightly into fists that her knuckles had gone bone white. Her heart beat loud enough in her own ears that she wondered if the delegates seated nearest her could somehow hear it too. All around the chamber, representatives from 47 alien species watched with a mixture of expressions, quiet satisfaction on some faces, visible relief on others, and on a few, something closer to barely concealed disgust. The presiding speaker of the Veltar, a towering figure with blue-green skin and 4 long, deliberate arms, raised his ceremonial staff high above his head. When he spoke, his voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder rolling over a mountain range. "The Galactic Council has reached its decision," he announced, by a vote of 43-4. "Humanity is expelled from this alliance, effective immediately." Sarah felt her heart drop straight through the floor. 15 years. 15 years of patient, careful diplomacy, of late nights drafting treaties, of quietly proving again and again that humanity deserved its place among the stars, and all of it had collapsed in the span of a single sentence. She let her eyes sweep across the vast chamber, searching the faces of species she had once, foolishly perhaps, considered friends. The Cathari delegation refused to meet her gaze, their many eyes fixed pointedly on the floor. The Zapirons, floating nearby in their hover chairs, looked almost pleased with themselves. Only the Altarians, seated near the back, wore expressions of genuine sorrow. Beside her, Admiral Marcus Rivera, Earth's senior military representative, sat like a carved statue, his face unreadable stone. His grey hair was perfectly combed, his uniform immaculate without a single wrinkle, but Sarah could see something burning behind his dark eyes, a controlled, simmering anger that hadn't yet found its outlet. Behind them, the rest of the human delegation sat frozen in shocked silence, no one quite able to process what had just happened. The Veltar speaker pressed forward without pause, his voice gaining a harder edge. "The charges against humanity are clear and proven," he declared. "First, excessive aggression in every recorded military encounter. Second, reckless advancement of dangerous technologies without proper council approval. Third, the possession of evolutionary traits fundamentally incompatible with peaceful galactic civilization." Sarah wanted to scream. Excessive aggression? Humanity had never once started a conflict, not a single one in 15 years. They'd only ever fought when attacked first, and won those fights so quickly, so completely, that it had apparently unsettled everyone watching. The Council called human tactics brutal and unconventional. Sarah called them effective, and there was a difference between the two that no one on that chamber floor seemed willing to acknowledge. The technology accusations were even more absurd, if she was honest with herself. Yes, humans learned fast. Yes, they improved on borrowed alien designs almost immediately. But wasn't that supposed to be the entire point of an alliance? Mutual benefit, shared progress. When another species had shared their fusion drive technology, human engineers had made it 30% more efficient within 6 months. When the Veltar themselves had shown off their prized communication systems, humans had built versions that worked twice as fast while using half the power. Every single improvement humanity made seemed only to deepen the Council's unease. Sarah had heard the whispers in the corridors for years now. Humans too fast, they adapt too quickly, they refuse to follow proper procedure. Then came words that struck like physical blows. Furthermore, the speaker continued, humanity has demonstrated a disturbing pattern of reverse engineering and improving upon shared technologies at rates that violate all established scientific principles. Their artificial intelligence systems exceed safety parameters developed over millennia of careful study. Their military innovations show a deeply concerning focus on efficiency over restraint. Admiral Rivera finally rose to his feet. His voice remained calm, deliberately so, but Sarah could hear the steel running beneath every word. If the council is finished listing its accusations, he said evenly, perhaps someone could explain to me exactly what we did wrong. We followed every treaty to the letter. We respected every boundary you drew. We shared our discoveries freely, without hesitation, without demanding anything in return. A ripple of uncomfortable clicking and murmuring swept across the chamber. The Cathari representative, a creature that looked disturbingly like the fusion of a spider and a tree, clicked its mandibles nervously before speaking. You shared your discoveries, yes, it admitted, but you also transformed everything you touched. Your improvements to our own technologies became so significant that our scientists could no longer fully understand their own inventions. The Zephyrian delegate, drifting gently in her hover chair near the center of the chamber, spoke next, her voice like the chiming of delicate wind bells. Your species learns too quickly, she said. In only 15 years, you have mastered technologies that took the rest of us centuries to develop properly. You have created weapons, drives, computers that make our greatest achievements look primitive by comparison. This is not natural. Sarah finally found her voice, and it came out sharper than she intended. Not natural. We're curious. We like building things. We like making things better. Since when exactly did that become a crime? The Veltar speaker's 4 eyes fixed directly on her, unblinking. It is not a crime, Ambassador Chen, he said, but it is dangerous. Your species has proven again and again that it cannot be contained by any normal limit. You push against every boundary we set. You question every rule we establish. You improve every system you encounter, whether we ask you to or not. Where exactly does it end? Admiral Rivera stepped forward, closing the distance toward the central podium. It ends with a better galaxy for everyone, he said firmly. The fusion drives we improved have made your own trade routes 40% more efficient. Our artificial intelligence systems have solved problems that stumped your scientists for generations. Our medical advances have saved millions of lives across dozens of allied species. And your military advances, the speaker replied, his tone turning cold, have created weapons capable of destroying entire fleets in minutes. Your ships now outpace and outgun anything else in this galaxy. Your soldiers train using methods that horrify our own military observers when they witness them. You treat warfare as though it was simultaneously an art form and an exact science. A chill ran through Sarah's entire body. She was beginning, finally, to understand. This had never really been about broken rules or disrupted peace. This was about fear, plain and simple. The Council was terrified of what humanity might eventually become if left unchecked. The speaker raised his staff one final time, and the chamber fell utterly silent in anticipation. Therefore, he announced humanity has 6 months to remove all personnel from Council space. All shared technologies must be returned intact or destroyed entirely. All joint research projects are terminated, effective this moment. All existing trade agreements are rendered void. Admiral Rivera's laugh, when it came, was low and bitter. You're making a mistake, he said quietly, but with enough force that it carried across the chamber. You think that removing us solves your problem, but we have been good allies to you. We have been honest, reliable partners. You may never get another chance to have humanity fighting on your side instead of against you. The Cathari representative clicked its mandibles again, this time with visible hesitation. Perhaps this punishment is too harsh, it said slowly. Humanity has contributed a great deal to our shared civilization, but the Veltar speaker remained utterly unmoved. The decision stands as final, he said. Humanity is too unpredictable, too aggressive. and ultimately too dangerous to remain within this alliance. It is better to end this now, before your species becomes an even greater threat than it already is. Sarah allowed her gaze to sweep across the chamber one final time, deliberately memorizing every face among the species that had voted against humanity. The Mork, who had been humanity's very first alien contact generations ago, the Veltar, who had personally sponsored Earth's original membership in the Council, the Zaporans, who had once traded technology with human scientists as freely as breathing. All of them now looked genuinely afraid of what their former allies might become. As the human delegation was escorted firmly toward the chamber's exit, Sarah noticed something strange happening beside her. Admiral Rivera had stopped arguing entirely. He wasn't protesting anymore, wasn't pleading his case to anyone who might still be listening. Instead, he was watching everything around him with the calm, calculating attention of a seasoned military strategist, studying the chamber's layout, silently counting security personnel, noting every visible exit route with the practiced eye of a man already 3 steps ahead. Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the Human Xenotechnology Division, walked quietly beside them, equally silent, but Sarah could see her fingers twitching slightly at her sides, as though she were already complex calculations somewhere deep in her mind. Elena had always possessed a rare gift with alien technology. She didn't just understand how a device worked, she could see, almost instantly, exactly how to make it work better. As they finally reached the exit corridor, Admiral Rivera leaned down slightly and spoke quietly to Sarah, his voice pitched just low enough that only she could hear it over the shuffle of departing feet. "Don't worry, Ambassador," he murmured. "This isn't over." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused, slowing her pace despite the guard's impatient gesture urging her forward. Rivera smiled then, and for the first time all day, it was a genuine smile, one that reached all the way to his eyes. He said, "The Council just made the single biggest mistake in galactic history. They're giving us 6 whole months to prepare. They're sending us far away from their oversight, from their endless rules and restrictions. They're handing us complete, total freedom to build whatever we want, however we want to build it." Sarah felt a chill run through her that absolutely nothing to do with the cold, sterile corridors of the Council station. "Marcus," she asked carefully, "what exactly are you thinking right now?" The Admiral's smile only grew wider, and for a moment he looked less like a weary diplomat and more like an explorer standing at the very edge of an extraordinary discovery. "I'm thinking," he said, "that humanity is about to very, very creative, and the galaxy is about to learn, in vivid detail, exactly why you should never back a human into a corner." As their transport ship finally pulled away from the massive Council station, Sarah turned and looked back one last time at the structure that had been humanity's home among the stars for a decade and a half. They were leaving in what the Council clearly considered disgrace, branded publicly as too dangerous for civilized space. She found herself wondering quietly whether the Council would ever come to realize what they had actually done that day, that they had just transformed a loyal, dependable ally into something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. They had just handed humanity every reason in the galaxy to prove exactly how dangerous it truly could be. The formal evacuation of humanity from Council space began exactly 3 days after the vote was cast. To any outside observer watching the sensor feeds, it would have looked like utter chaos, hundreds upon hundreds of human ships moving frantically between colonies, research outposts, and diplomatic stations scattered across a dozen systems. Emergency broadcasts flooded every available communication channel. Families across human space packed decades of belongings into cramped cargo holds, preparing to abandon homes they had built with their own hands. But Admiral Rivera, watching from the command center on Lunar Base, knew far better than to mistake this scene for disorder. This wasn't chaos at all. This was, in fact, the largest and most intricately coordinated military operation in the entirety of human history, and it was unfolding precisely according to a plan drafted years in advance. Operation Exodus is proceeding exactly on schedule, reported Colonel James Park, his voice crisp and professional over the comm line. All Phase 1 objectives have been completed ahead of projections. We're moving directly into Phase 2. Rivera nodded slowly as he studied the massive holographic display dominating the command center, tracking human positions scattered throughout the galaxy. Red dots marked evacuations already completed. Blue dots showed operations still actively underway. And scattered quietly among them, a handful of green dots represented something the Council had absolutely no knowledge of whatsoever. Hidden assets that, officially, were never supposed to exist in the first place. The truth, known to only a select few, was that humanity had been quietly preparing for precisely this moment since its third full year within the Council. Not because anyone had wanted to leave, far from it, but because humans had learned, through hard experience, to plan meticulously for every conceivable possibility. And if there was one thing humanity had always excelled at, it was preparing thoroughly for the absolute worst. Dr. Lena Vasquez entered the command center at that moment, carrying a sealed data case pressed tightly against her chest. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled from days of continuous, uninterrupted work, but her eyes were bright, almost feverish, with barely contained excitement. "Marcus," she said without preamble, "you need to see this right now." She activated a private hologram that filled the space between them with dense technical specifications for dozens of separate devices. Rivera recognized several immediately: fusion drives, artificial intelligence cores, advanced medical scanners, quantum computing arrays. But something was clearly wrong with the numbers displayed beside each one. The performance figures were far too high to be accurate. "What exactly am I looking at, Elena?" he asked slowly. "The real story," she said, grinning despite the exhaustion visible on her face. "For 15 full years, the Council has been generously sharing their technology with us. What they never realized, not once, is that we've been quietly improving absolutely everything they gave us, and not by small margins either, dramatically, across the board." She gestured toward a detailed fusion drive schematic floating between them. "Their standard version produces 1,000 units of usable power. Our improved version produces 3,000 units using the exact same fuel consumption, and it happens to be significantly more reliable in the process." Rivera felt his pulse quicken noticeably. "How much more reliable are we talking about?" "Our drives can now run continuously for 50 full years without requiring any maintenance whatsoever," Elena explained. "Theirs needs servicing every 5 years without exception. Our artificial intelligence systems process information at speeds that would completely crash their existing networks within seconds. Our medical technology can now heal injuries that Council doctors consider outright fatal." She opened another file with a practiced flick of her wrist. "But here's the truly remarkable surprise, Marcus. We haven't just been improving their existing technology in isolation. We've been actively combining it in entirely new ways they never once considered. Communication systems fused seamlessly with Cathara processing architecture and distinctly human intuitive interfaces. The end result is something completely new under any sun." Admiral Rivera stared at the scrolling data for a long, silent moment. "Elena," he said finally, "are you telling me that humanity's technology is now genuinely superior to anything currently possessed by the entire Council?" "Not just superior, Marcus," she replied immediately. "It's so far beyond their current capabilities that Council scientists would probably assume our equipment was simply impossible to build. Remember, they fundamentally believe in slow, cautious, careful progress spread across centuries of careful study. We believe in rapid innovation and bold, decisive experimentation. That fundamental difference in mindset has created an enormous, ever-widening gap in raw practical capability. Rivera walked slowly toward the massive window overlooking Luna's cratered surface below. Down there, sprawling construction yards stretched for kilometers in every direction, where humanity's entirely new fleet of ships was steadily taking shape. Ships designed with absolutely no council oversight whatsoever, free from every bureaucratic limitation, with no requirement to follow anyone else's approved procedures. "Show me the ships," he said quietly. Elena activated a second, larger hologram. The design that materialized in the air before them was unlike anything currently existing anywhere in the galaxy. It was considerably larger than even the biggest council battleships on record, yet its overall silhouette was sleek and elegant rather than bulky or cumbersome. It bristled visibly with weapon systems built on principles the Council had officially banned decades earlier as far too dangerous for responsible use. Most importantly of all, it possessed a single capability that no other ship in the entire galaxy could match. It could build more ships entirely on its own, while still actively cruising through open space. "We're calling this design the Prometheus class," Elena explained, unmistakable pride coloring her voice. "It's simultaneously part battleship, part mobile factory, part dedicated research station, and part self-sufficient colony ship, all rolled into a single hull. A single completed Prometheus can establish an entire functioning industrial base on any habitable world within roughly 6 months. It can defend itself effectively against an entire enemy fleet, while simultaneously conducting active scientific research and training brand new personnel, all at the very same time." Rivera smiled slowly, watching the schematic rotate in the empty air. "How many of these are we currently building?" he asked. "The very first completed unit launches next week," Elena replied. "We'll have a full 12 operational by the end of this year. And by the end of the coming decade, we'll have hundreds scattered across our territory." A sudden communication alert interrupted their conversation. "Admiral," Colonel Park's voice cut in urgently, "we're receiving an incoming transmission from the Rim Territories." The Rim Territories, the distant, lawless outer edge of the galaxy that no established civilized species had ever bothered to properly settle. That region of space was notorious for dangerous natural phenomena, brutally harsh environmental conditions, and treacherously difficult mining operations. It was, quite deliberately, exactly where humanity was now being forcibly exiled to. The incoming transmission showed Captain Diana Walsh, widely considered one of Rivera's finest officers, standing calmly on the bridge of an exploration vessel. Behind her, visible clearly through the ship's massive viewports, Rivera could make out a genuinely spectacular view of a shimmering purple nebula wrapped around a tight cluster of newly forming young stars. Admiral Walsh reported crisply, "We've just completed our full survey of the outer reach sectors. I have good news for you, and considerably better news right behind it." "Let's hear all of it, Captain," Rivera replied. "The good news," she began, "is that the Rim Territories are even richer in resources than we had originally hoped. The asteroid fields scattered throughout this region contain more concentrated rare metals than anything currently found within Council space. The raw energy output from these young star systems alone could realistically power all of human civilization for literally millions of years to come." Rivera leaned forward intently. "And the better news?" he asked. Walsh grinned broadly. "The better news, Admiral, is that we are most definitely not alone out here. We've already made peaceful first contact with 17 entirely different species that the Council has apparently never even heard of before. They're mostly small, struggling civilizations, most of them fighting simply to survive in these harsh, unforgiving conditions. But Admiral, some of their native technologies are genuinely incredible." A new figure stepped smoothly into frame Biswash, a tall, remarkably thin being with striking silver skin and enormous, deep black eyes. When it finally spoke, its words were rendered through human translation computers in a smooth, measured tone. "I am Kiel of the Nethers Commonwealth," the alien said. "We have observed your species' arrival within the Rim territories with considerable interest. Your technology appears strangely familiar to us." Rivera raised an eyebrow with curiosity. "Familiar in what specific way?" he asked. "You build much as we ourselves build," Kiel replied. "Fast, efficient, and practical, not slow and endlessly cautious like the council species we have encountered before. We have been entirely alone out here for a very long time, Admiral Rivera. Perhaps now we no longer have to remain alone." After the transmission finally ended, Rivera stood in contemplative silence for several long minutes. Elena waited patient beside him, saying nothing. Finally, the Admiral spoke again. "Elena," he said, "I want you to significantly accelerate the entire Prometheus program. I want that first ship fully ready within 1 month, not next week as originally planned." "Sir, that's simply impossible given our current timeline," she protested. "Then find a way to make it possible," Rivera interrupted firmly, "because I am beginning to strongly suspect that getting expelled from the Council might actually turn out to be the single best thing that has ever happened to humanity." Lena stared at him, clearly confused. "How exactly do you figure that?" Rivera turned to face her directly, and she was genuinely surprised to see that he was smiling, not the grim, hardened smile of a soldier steadily preparing for war, but rather the eager, almost boyish smile of an explorer standing on the very edge of a wonderful discovery. "Think carefully about it, Elena," he said. "For 15 entire years, we've been desperately trying to fit neatly into their established system, following their endless rules, carefully respecting their arbitrary boundaries, being constantly careful never to offend anyone. This whole time, without even fully realizing it, we've been deliberately holding ourselves back." He gestured broadly toward the Rim territories displayed prominently on the star chart. "But out there," he continued, "there are no council rules whatsoever to follow. No regulations dictating what technology we're permitted to develop. No committees required to approve our ongoing research. No votes determining whether our methods are somehow too aggressive or too fast for anyone's comfort." Elena's expression slowly shifted as understanding dawned on her. "You're saying that we're finally free," she said quietly. "I'm saying," Rivera confirmed, "that we are finally free to simply be human, free to innovate as rapidly as we can possibly think, free to build absolutely anything we can imagine building. Free to form genuine alliances with anyone willing to work honestly with us, rather than being restricted to only the species the Council happened to formally approve of." He gestured once more toward the data showing humanity's dramatic improvements to borrowed Council technology. "They were afraid," he said, "of what we might eventually become if left completely unchecked. Well, they're about to discover something far worse for them, because we are going to build something out there in the darkness that they never once imagined possible." Elena looked down at the detailed Prometheus specifications, then back up at the vast, largely unexplored territories of the galactic rim displayed on the chart. "What exactly are we going to build, Marcus?" she asked quietly. Admiral Rivera's smile turned distinctly predatory. "We are going to build an empire, Elena," he said. "Not the destructive kind built on conquest and fear, like the old terrestrial empires of Earth's distant past, but rather an empire built firmly on the things humans have always done best: innovation, rapid adaptation, and an almost unnatural ability to turn every single disadvantage into a decisive advantage." Outside the observation window, the first completed sections of the new Prometheus Kleps gleamed brightly under the harsh floodlights of the construction yards below. Soon enough, those very ships would carry all of humanity out into the vast, unknown regions of the galaxy. The Council had expelled humanity because they were genuinely afraid of human potential. They were about to discover, in time, that their worst possible fears hadn't been nearly ambitious enough. 25 long years had now passed since humanity's formal expulsion from the Galactic Council. Captain Diana Walsh stood calmly on the bridge of the HSV Prometheus, watching intently through the massive forward viewport as her ship steadily approached the sprawling Kepler mining complex. What she observed below would have utterly amazed any Council observer fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. The asteroid field that had once been nothing but empty, drifting space was now home to literally thousands of interconnected structures. Massive mining platforms methodically carved precious metal from floating rocks the size of small cities. Factory ships continuously assembled brand new vessels, while nearby research stations conducted bold experiments that would have horrified conservative council scientists with their sheer ambitious scope. Transport vessels moved constantly between installations in unbroken streams, carrying raw materials, finished manufactured goods, and rotating personnel. But most impressive of all, by far, were the defense platforms scattered strategically throughout the complex, sleek, unmistakably deadly constructions capable of destroying entire enemy fleets, while barely drawing any noticeable power from their compact main reactors. Each individual platform was armed with sophisticated weapons based directly on human improvements to technologies borrowed from a dozen entirely different allied species. Admiral Rivera would be genuinely proud of all this, commented Commander Sarah Kim, Walsh's trusted second-in-command, standing quietly beside her. When we first started this ambitious project, people across the Confederacy openly called it impossible. Walsh smiled faintly at the memory. People have been calling human projects impossible for literal centuries now, she said. We just quietly ignore them and build the things anyway. The Prometheus itself served as the proud flagship of humanity's entirely new fleet, and it represented absolutely everything the old Council had once feared about unrestrained human engineering. The ship itself was fully 3 times larger than the single biggest Council vessel ever constructed, yet it somehow moved considerably faster than even their smallest, mobile scout ships. Its outer hull was constructed from advanced alloys that skillfully combined crystalline technology with Cathari biometals and traditional human carbon fiber techniques. The resulting armor could reliably survive direct hits that would have instantly vaporized any comparable Council ship, but the Prometheus was never simply a warship, not really. As Walsh had gradually come to understand over her many years of service, it was something else entirely, a genuinely mobile city, fully capable of establishing new colonies, conducting advanced scientific research, manufacturing complex equipment, and defending itself against literally any conceivable threat, all simultaneously. Captain, we're receiving an incoming transmission from the surface below, reported Lieutenant Torres from her station at the communications console. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the familiar face of Dr. Lena Vasquez, now serving as Director of Human Technology Development. Behind her, Walsh could clearly make out the sprawling laboratories of New Geneva Station, an entire research facility ingeniously constructed inside a hollowed-out asteroid that had been methodically transformed into humanity's primary center for advanced research. Diana, good to see you again, Elena said warmly, her voice carrying genuine affection. I assume you're here specifically for the demonstration. Wouldn't miss it for absolutely anything, Walsh replied with a small smile. Is the new prototype finally ready? Elena's answering grin was more than sufficient answer in itself. Come down to Lab 7, she said. You are genuinely going to love this one. An hour later, Walsh stood quietly inside the laboratory, staring down at something that, by all reasonable measures, simply shouldn't have existed. The device itself was barely larger than an ordinary briefcase, Yet according to Elena's detailed specifications, it contained enough raw processing power to comfortably run the combined computer systems of an entire council fleet simultaneously. It's built using quantum processors originally sourced from the Altarians, organic neural networks adapted from the Nethys, and distinctly human intuitive programming techniques layered throughout, Elena explained carefully. But we've integrated all three elements together in a way that creates something entirely, genuinely new. Watch closely. She activated the compact device with a single practiced gesture. Instantly, elaborate holographic displays filled the surrounding laboratory space with dense calculations, detailed star charts, complex tactical analyses, and precise resource projections, all rendered simultaneously with staggering, almost incomprehensible processing speed. This single unit alone, Elena said proudly, can coordinate the movements of 1,000 separate ships, plan the systematic colonization of 50 separate worlds, and conduct scientific research that would ordinarily take council computers literal decades to complete. And it accomplishes all of this while using considerably less power than their most basic communication systems require. Walsh shook her head slowly in genuine amazement. Elena, this is absolutely incredible, she said, but it's also going to thoroughly terrify them. Good, said a familiar voice from the laboratory's main entrance. Walsh turned to see Admiral Rivera standing there, considerably older now, but still carrying himself with the same unmistakable military precision he always had. Fear makes people careful, he said simply, and careful people, in my considerable experience, tend to make mistakes. Rivera walked closer, approaching the glowing quantum computer display with evident interest. How many of these devices can we realistically build? He asked. As many as we'd possibly want, Elena replied confidently. The required materials are all quite common. The entire manufacturing process is fully automated, and we currently have 17 different allied species actively helping us continuously improve the underlying design. The Guthrie contributed advanced crystalline storage matrices. The Vorth added specialized biological processing elements. The Kurth independently developed entirely new power delivery systems. Walsh found herself impressed, though not particularly surprised. Over the course of 25 years, humanity had steadily encountered dozens of distinct species scattered throughout the Rim territories. Unlike the established council races, these particular species had generally been struggling simply to survive under harsh conditions. As a direct result, they deeply understood the practical value of genuine cooperation and rapid, aggressive innovation. More importantly still, they weren't remotely frightened by human improvements to their own native technology. When humans had taken the Guthrie's original crystal-growing techniques and made the entire process 10 times faster, the Guthrie had been absolutely delighted by the result. When humans had skillfully combined Vorth biotechnology with human medical knowledge to create advanced healing systems capable of fully regenerating entire lost limbs, the Vorth had openly called it nothing short of a genuine miracle. Admiral Walsh said thoughtfully, "We've now been operating out here for a full 2.5 decades. Our total territory currently spans across 3 entire spiral arms of the galaxy. We have allies the Council has never once heard of, technology they genuinely cannot even imagine, and resources that thoroughly dwarf their entire remaining civilization combined. When exactly do we finally make formal contact with them again?" Rivera remained quiet for a long, thoughtful moment. Then he smiled. "Soon, Diana," he said. "Very soon indeed. But first, I want you to see something important." He led both women toward a heavily secured section of the laboratory, where a massive holographic display illuminated the current overall state of human space in exhaustive detail. The resulting image was genuinely breathtaking to behold. Red dots marked human colonies now numbering comfortably in the thousands. Blue lines traced out extensive trade routes connecting hundreds of separate star systems. Green markers indicated allied species, a remarkable 43 distinct civilizations that had formally joined humanity's rapidly growing confederation over the years. But most impressive of all was a subtle yellow overlay representing total industrial capacity. Humanity's rim territories now produced considerably more ships, more advanced weapons, more cutting-edge technology, and more raw resources than the entire remaining Galactic Council combined. The Council expelled us, Rivera said quietly, because they were genuinely afraid we would eventually become far too powerful. They were entirely correct to be afraid, Elena, but they made one single, crucial, fatal mistake in how they used to handle that fear. What mistake exactly? Walsh asked. They believed, Rivera explained, that they could carefully control the eventual outcome simply by removing us from their sight. But all they actually accomplished was handing us the complete freedom necessary to become everything they had originally feared we might come. He reached out and zoomed the display to focus specifically on the border region between human space and remaining Council territory. Our scouts have been quietly watching them for years now, he continued. They're stagnating badly, Diana. Their core technology hasn't meaningfully improved in decades. Their overall economy is struggling significantly because they steadfastly refuse to embrace more efficient methods. Their military still relies heavily on the exact same tactics they were using a full century ago. Elena nodded in firm agreement. Meanwhile, she added, we've been growing at a genuinely exponential rate this entire time. Every single year, we become stronger, faster, and considerably smarter. Every year, we successfully incorporate new species and fresh ideas into our expanding confederation. And every year, Rivera added grimly, the widening gap between us and them grows measurably larger. Walsh studied the detailed comparison display carefully. The visual contrast was genuinely striking. Council's space appeared static and unchanging, seemingly locked permanently into ancient, rigid patterns. Human space, by stark contrast, appeared dynamic and vibrant, constantly growing, evolving, and adapting in real time. What exactly is our next planned move? She finally asked. Rivera's expression turned noticeably more serious. Tomorrow, he said, you're taking the Prometheus on a special diplomatic mission. You're going to personally pay a visit to the Council's border territories. Walsh felt her pulse quicken sharply. Are we talking about some kind of invasion here? She asked carefully. No, Rivera said, allowing a slight smile. We're talking specifically about a diplomatic mission. It's finally time to let the Council know, in no uncertain terms, that humanity didn't merely survive their exile. It's time to properly show them exactly what we've quietly become in the intervening years. The very first sign of humanity's dramatic return came from the outermost border systems. Council patrol ships began reporting increasingly strange encounters with vessels of completely unknown design. These mysterious ships would appear suddenly without any warning whatsoever, thoroughly scan Council installations using equipment that easily penetrated even military-grade shielding, then simply vanish again before any defensive systems could possibly respond. Commander Zier of the Velta Border Guard filed the exact same troubling report for the 5th time in barely 2 months. Unknown vessels continue to actively probe our sensor networks, he wrote. These ships appear to utilize stealth technology well beyond our current understanding. All our attempts at direct communication have been completely ignored. The Council's official response was entirely predictable. They significantly increased border patrols, hastily upgraded their existing sensor systems, and issued repeated formal warnings about unauthorized vessels operating within Council space. But the mysterious ghost ships continued their unexplained activities regardless, always managing to stay just barely out of reach. What the Council entirely failed to realize was that these encounters were never actually random in the first place. Captain Diana Walsh was, in fact, quietly conducting the single most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in the entirety of galactic history. The Prometheus and her growing fleet of sister ships had spent a full 6 months methodically mapping every single Council installation, carefully analyzing their defensive capabilities, thoroughly studying their remaining technology, and precisely assessing their overall military capabilities. The final results, Admiral Rivera's original predictions almost perfectly. They genuinely haven't changed at all, Walsh reported during a secure transmission back to Earth Command. Same basic ship designs they were using 20 years ago. Same weapons, same shield technology, same tired tactics. They're completely static, Admiral, frozen in time. Admiral Rivera studied the incoming intelligence reports carefully from his office aboard Lunar Base. His hair had gone completely white by now, and his face clearly showed the deep lines of advancing age, but his mind remained every bit as sharp as it had ever been. "What about their overall economy?" he asked. "Struggling badly," Walsh replied. "Their trade routes remain hopelessly inefficient because they steadfastly refuse to upgrade their outdated transportation systems. Manufacturing output is painfully slow because they won't adopt more modern automated techniques. They're actually producing noticeably fewer ships now than they were producing when we originally left Council space entirely." Rivera wasn't remotely surprised by any of this. The Council's stubborn obsession with slow, overly careful progress had always represented their single greatest weakness. While humanity and its growing network of allies had been rapidly innovating at incredible speeds, the Council had continued dutifully following the exact same outdated procedures year after year after year. "Any indication that they've become aware of our empire?" Rivera asked. "They're starting to grow visibly worried about scattered reports coming in from the Rim territories," Walsh said. "Apparently, some of their deep space explorers have recently encountered members of our various allied species. The detailed descriptions of Nethys technology and Gathri manufacturing capabilities have left their scientists thoroughly confused and unsettled." Rivera smiled grimly at the news. "I imagine they are," he said. "Are you fully ready for the next phase of the operation?" Walsh nodded firmly. "All systems are ready, Admiral," she confirmed. "This is going to come as quite a considerable shock to them." The very next day, the annual gathering of the Galactic Council was proceeding exactly as it had for the past full century, with mind-numbing predictability. Representatives from 47 separate species sat scattered throughout the Great Chamber, debating routine trade regulations and minor territorial boundary disputes. The Veltos speaker was midway through a lengthy, tedious presentation concerning routine border patrol schedules when every single sensor throughout the chamber suddenly began screaming urgent alerts simultaneously. The massive display screens revealed something that should have been genuinely impossible. An enormous ship had materialized directly in the center of the Council's home system without triggering even a single early warning device along the way. The ship that had appeared on their screens was unlike absolutely anything the Council had ever previously encountered. It was truly enormous, easily 3 times larger than their single biggest existing vessel, yet its overall design was remarkably elegant rather than bulky or cumbersome. The outer hull gleamed with what appeared to be genuinely living metal that subtly shifted colors as the ship slowly moved through space. Most disturbing of all, it was actively broadcasting on frequencies the Council's systems didn't recognize, using sophisticated encryption methods their best cryptographers couldn't begin to decode. Widespread panic quickly spread throughout the chamber as senior military commanders desperately tried to understand exactly how such a massive vessel had managed to appear completely undetected. Their most advanced long-range sensors should have easily spotted anything that large from several light years away at minimum. Then the mysterious ship finally sent a formal transmission on standard Council communication frequencies. The face that appeared on the main view screen was unmistakably human, though the woman wore a uniform design, unlike anything the assembled Council delegates remembered from decades past. Captain Diana Walsh, now properly Admiral Walsh, appeared visibly older and considerably more confident than she had been 25 years earlier. "Greetings, Galactic Council," she said, allowing a slight smile to touch her lips. "This is Admiral Diana Walsh, representing the Human Confederacy. I am here today specifically to request a formal diplomatic audience to discuss new territorial boundaries and updated trade agreements between our respective civilizations." The entire chamber immediately erupted into complete chaos. Representatives shouted urgent questions over one another. Senior military officers demanded immediate explanations from anyone who might have them. The Velta speaker desperately to restore any semblance of order. When silence finally, gradually returned, his very first words clearly revealed the sheer depth of the Council's collective shock. "Humans," he said slowly, "but you were formally expelled from our space decades ago. You were explicitly ordered to permanently withdraw beyond the Rim territories. How exactly do you now possess such remarkably advanced vessels?" Walsh's calm expression never wavered even slightly. "We did withdraw beyond the Rim territories," she confirmed, "exactly as originally ordered. What we discovered out there turned out to be genuinely interesting, however." She activated a detailed holographic display that filled the entire chamber with elaborate star charts. The assembled Council representatives stared in growing, mounting horror as the true scope of humanity's dramatic expansion gradually became clear. The distant territories they had once dismissed as worthless wastelands were now visibly marked with thousands upon thousands of established human installations. 25 years ago, Walsh continued, "You expelled humanity because you genuinely considered us too dangerous for civilized space. You were specifically concerned about our rapid technological advancement and our unconventional military tactics. I am here today specifically to inform you that your original concerns were entirely well-founded." The Cathari representative, clicking nervously, finally managed to speak up. "Admiral Walsh," it said, "your ship incorporates technologies that we simply do not recognize." "How exactly is this even possible?" "It's actually quite simple," Walsh replied evenly. "While the Council has spent past 25 years carefully maintaining the status quo, humanity has spent that same time exploring, learning, and growing at a remarkable pace. The Rim territories that you once considered entirely empty were, in fact, home to 43 distinct species possessing remarkable native technologies and a genuinely strong interest in mutual cooperation." She highlighted several specific systems on the expansive star chart. "The Nethys developed advanced quantum processing systems that make your existing computers look genuinely primitive by comparison. The Gathri created manufacturing techniques capable of building entire fleets within mere weeks, rather than requiring years of construction time. The Vorth discovered biotechnology applications that can effectively heal injuries your medical science currently considers absolutely fatal." The Zepyrian delegate's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "You allied yourselves with entirely unknown species," she said. "We didn't merely ally with them," Walsh said proudly. "We fully integrated our respective civilizations together. We shared our technologies completely freely, and we learned extensively from theirs in return. Together, we created something genuinely entirely new, a confederacy built firmly on the principles of mutual benefit and rapid, continuous innovation." Admiral Rivera's image appeared beside Walsh's on the shared transmission at that moment. Though visibly older now, His presence still commanded considerable respect throughout the chamber. "Honorable members of the council," he said, "humanity harbors no genuine desire for conflict here. We have come specifically to establish formal diplomatic relations between our two civilizations." The Veltar speaker finally found his voice again. "Admiral Rivera," he said sharply, "your very presence today directly violates the explicit terms of your expulsion. You were formally ordered never to return to council space under any circumstances." Rivera's responding smile was distinctly cold. "Those particular terms," he said, "were originally negotiated when humanity existed as a single, relatively limited species with genuinely limited resources at its disposal. The overall situation has changed rather significantly since that time." Another detailed hologram activated, this one displaying direct industrial capacity comparisons between the two civilizations. The resulting numbers were genuinely staggering. Humanity's confederacy now controlled considerably more total resources than the entire Galactic Council combined. Their manufacturing capacity was fully 10 times larger. Their overall rate of technological advancement had accelerated to speeds the Council had previously considered mathematically impossible to achieve. "This simply isn't possible," whispered the Mork representative in genuine disbelief. "No civilization could conceivably achieve such dramatic growth within a mere 25 years. No Council civilization could achieve such growth," Walsh corrected gently. "But we are no longer a Council civilization and haven't been for quite some time now. We are something entirely new. We are a confederation that fundamentally values innovation over rigid tradition, cooperation over strict hierarchy, and measurable results over bureaucratic procedure." The entire chamber fell into stunned silence as the full implications gradually sank in. The very species they had once expelled as far too dangerous had somehow become more powerful than all of them combined. Worse still, they had accomplished this remarkable feat by deliberately embracing the exact same qualities the Council had originally found so threatening. The Altarian delegate, one of the vanishingly few species that had actually opposed humanity's original expulsion, spoke up carefully. "What exactly are your intentions toward remaining Council space?" she asked. Rivera's expression softened slightly at the question. "Our intentions are genuinely peaceful," he said, "but they are also entirely non-negotiable. The wider galaxy has already changed, whether the Council chooses to formally recognize that fact or not. Your choice going forward is really quite simple. Adapt to this new reality, or be permanently left behind by it. We are formally offering the Council a genuine opportunity to join the modern galaxy," Walsh added. "Trade agreements that will meaningfully revitalize your struggling economies. Technology transfers that will advance your civilizations by literal centuries in a single generation. Cultural exchanges that will genuinely benefit absolutely everyone involved." "And if we simply refuse your generous offer?" asked the Veltar speaker. Rivera's calm answer sent a visible chill throughout the entire chamber. "Then you continue along your current path," he said simply, "while the rest of the galaxy moves steadily forward without you." The transmission finally ended, leaving the Council chamber sitting in absolutely stunned silence. Outside the great chamber windows, they could still clearly see the impossible human ship hanging motionless in space, like a quiet, patient promise of things yet to come. The species that once been formally deemed too dangerous for galactic civilization had finally returned. But they hadn't come back as humble supplicants seeking readmission to the Council. They had returned instead as the confident leaders of something far greater than the old Council had ever managed to imagine. The formal negotiations ultimately took place on carefully neutral ground, aboard a space station specifically constructed within the buffer zone separating Council space from the human confederacy. The station itself silently told the story of just how much had genuinely changed. Built entirely by human engineering teams in a mere 6 months, it incorporated technologies borrowed from dozens of different species and provided facilities sophisticated enough to genuinely amaze even the most veteran career diplomats. Admiral Marcus Rivera, now well into his 80s but still remaining sharp as a blade, sat directly across from the very same Velta speaker who had originally expelled humanity 25 years earlier. The alien had visibly aged as well, his blue-green skin now marked with the characteristic darker patches that indicated advanced age among his species. Between them sat carefully arranged representatives from both civilizations. But the overall balance of power in the room was unmistakably obvious to everyone present. The council delegation appeared tired, visibly worried, and thoroughly overwhelmed by recent events. The Human Confederacy delegation, by stark contrast, radiated genuine confidence and restless energy. "Let me make certain I fully understand your proposal," the Veltar speaker said slowly, choosing his words with obvious care. "You want us to completely abandon our traditional governmental structure, open every single one of our technologies for entirely unrestricted sharing, and formally accept your various allied species as fully equal members within some new galactic organization." President Lisa Chang, humanity's newly elected leader, nodded calmly in response. "That's essentially correct," she confirmed. "The realistic alternative is watching your remaining civilizations slowly but steadily decline while the rest of the galaxy continues moving forward without you." She activated a detailed holographic display showing comprehensive economic projections. The underlying data was stark and genuinely undeniable. Council worlds were experiencing steadily declining birth rates, dramatically reduced innovation, gradually failing infrastructure, and widespread social stagnation across the board. Meanwhile, Confederacy worlds' genuinely explosive growth in absolutely every measurable category imaginable. "Your rigid caste systems actively discourage innovation at every level," Dr. Lina Vasquez explained patiently. "Your bureaucratic approval processes slow technological development to an absolute crawl. Your deep-seated fear of change has effectively made change itself your greatest enemy." The Cathari representative clicked his mandibles nervously in response. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, "our carefully established systems have successfully maintained peace and stability for literal millennia. How exactly can you possibly call that genuine failure?" Elena's response, though delivered gently, proved genuinely devastating. "Because peace without any accompanying growth isn't true stability," she said. "It's simply slow death, spread out over generations. Your populations continue declining because your young people have effectively lost all hope of meaningfully improving their circumstances. Your economies keep stagnating because you actively punish innovation wherever you find it. Your military technology remains centuries behind our own precisely because you remain afraid of weapons that might actually effectively work." Admiral Rivera leaned forward in his chair. 25 years ago," he said, "you expelled us specifically because you were afraid of what humanity might eventually become. You were entirely right to be afraid. In retrospect, you were simply wrong about how to properly handle that fear." The Zephyrian delegate spoke up in her characteristic wind chime voice. "What exactly do you mean by that, Admiral?" she asked. "You attempted to solve your problem by simply getting rid of us," Rivera explained patiently. "But the real underlying problem was never actually humanity itself. The real problem was that your various civilizations had already stopped evolving entirely. We were merely the visible symptom that finally forced you to notice the underlying disease." President Chang activated yet another display, this one illustrating the overall organizational structure of the Human Confederacy in detail. Instead of the rigid, inflexible hierarchies the Council had always preferred, the Confederacy was organized instead as a dynamic, flexible network where individual species, entire worlds, and even single individuals could rise steadily based purely on demonstrated merit and genuine contribution. Consider our various allied species carefully, Chang said. The Nethys were struggling badly with severe resource shortages when we first discovered them. Now they serve as recognized leaders in quantum technology development throughout the entire Confederacy. The Gathri were barely surviving through difficult asteroid mining operations. Now they successfully run the single most efficient manufacturing systems anywhere in the galaxy. The Vorth had been isolated for literal centuries, added Admiral Walsh, who had joined the ongoing negotiations remotely via secure quantum communication, simply because other species found their biotechnology somewhat disturbing to look at. Now their advanced medical breakthroughs are actively saving millions of lives across a full 40 different allied species. The assembled council representatives shifted visibly in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. They all knew, deep down, about their own steadily declining populations, their failing economies, their mounting social problems. But openly admitting that humanity's supposedly dangerous approach might actually genuinely superior felt almost impossible for many of them to accept. The Altarian delegate, who had always been noticeably more open-minded than most of her colleagues, spoke up carefully. "What genuine guarantees do we actually have," she asked, "that formally joining your confederacy won't simply result in eventual human domination over everyone else?" Rivera smiled reassuringly. "The exact same guarantee we extended to every other species that has ever joined us," he said. "The genuine opportunity to prove precisely what you're truly capable of once you're no longer held back by artificial, arbitrary limitations." He gestured broadly toward the other human representatives seated nearby. Admiral Walsh started her career as a relatively junior captain. Vasquez began as simply another xenotechnology researcher among many. President Chang herself started out as an ordinary colony administrator. None of them inherited their current positions through birthright, nor were they formally appointed by any distant committee. They earned every single one of their current roles entirely through demonstrated competence and measurable results. The exact same underlying principle applies equally to entire species, Chang added. The Kurth currently lead our extensive exploration programs specifically because they happen to be the very best at that particular task. The Ducky run our diplomatic corps because they possess a genuinely natural talent for understanding wildly different cultures. The Gathri dominate manufacturing because they fundamentally revolutionize the entire underlying process. Elena leaned forward slightly. "The real question here," she said, isn't whether humans will somehow dominate the Confederacy going forward. The real question is what each individual species, humanity very much included, can genuinely contribute to something far greater than any single one of us could ever hope to achieve entirely alone. The Veltar speaker remained quiet for a considerably long moment, clearly turning something over carefully in his mind. Finally, he spoke again. "What you are proposing here today," he said slowly, "would fundamentally change our entire civilization from the ground up, our social structures, our established governments, even our basic ways of thinking about the universe. Absolutely everything would need to change." "Yes," Rivera said simply. "That is precisely, exactly what we are proposing here today. But what if we ultimately prove incapable of such sweeping change?" the speaker asked, a note of genuine vulnerability creeping into his otherwise formal tone. "What if our various species simply aren't adaptable enough to survive such a transition?" President Chang's expression softened noticeably at the question. "With genuine respect, Honorable Speaker," she said gently, "you are already changing whether you consciously realized or not." The assembled council representatives struggled visibly with concepts that fundamentally challenged everything they had ever believed about civilization. proper governance and the nature of progress itself. But gradually, steadily, the harsh reality of the overall situation became genuinely impossible to keep denying. Their civilizations were dying slowly, while humanity's confederation continued exploding outward with life, energy, and relentless growth. Their technology remained stubbornly stagnant while human allies achieved genuine breakthroughs practically every single month. Their own young people kept leaving for human space in ever-increasing, alarming numbers. The final formal agreement was eventually signed by President Chang alongside 38 separate council species. 9 remaining species ultimately chose to maintain their traditional independence and continue along their existing path, though they were explicitly permitted to do so with the clear understanding that the standing offer to join would remain permanently open to them. 6 months later, President Chang stood confidently before the very first full assembly of the newly formed Galactic Confederacy. The chamber itself was noticeably larger and considerably more diverse than the old council hall had ever been, comfortably accommodating representatives from an impressive 93 entirely different species. The overall atmosphere throughout the chamber was genuinely electric with palpable possibility. Somewhere in the audience, Admiral Rivera smiled quietly as he watched species that had once been bitter enemies for literal centuries, now working productively together on ambitious joint projects. The old council's rigid caste systems had been thoroughly replaced by a new and merit-based advancement. The stifling bureaucratic approval processes had been dramatically streamlined specifically to encourage bold innovation rather than quietly suffocating it. Most remarkably of all, the pervasive fear that had dominated galactic politics for literal millennia was steadily being replaced by genuine, palpable excitement about what the future might bring. Dr. Lena Vasquez, now serving as Director of Confederacy Scientific Development, formally presented the Assembly's very first major joint project, an ambitious exploration mission to the mysterious galactic core, where ancient mysteries had waited patiently for species brave enough and sufficiently innovative enough to finally solve them. This particular mission represents absolutely everything our new Confederacy genuinely stands for, she announced proudly. Ships constructed using advanced technologies borrowed from a full dozen different species, crewed entirely by enthusiastic volunteers drawn from 50 separate worlds, boldly exploring regions that our respective ancestors had once considered entirely impossible to reach. The mission itself finally launched a full year later. The assembled fleet was proudly led once again by the HSV Prometheus, now thoroughly upgraded with the very latest available Confederacy technologies. Captain Walsh, recently promoted to the rank of Fleet Admiral, now commanded a diverse force that genuinely represented the very best that galactic civilization currently had to offer. As the assembled ships finally departed for the distant galactic core, President Chang watched quietly from the observation deck of New Geneva Station. Standing beside her was Admiral Rivera, now formally retired but still actively serving as a trusted senior advisor. "Do you honestly think the Council ever imagined any of this?" she asked quietly, back when they first chose to expel us all those years ago. Rivera chuckled softly at the question. "They were genuinely afraid," he said, "that we would eventually become too dangerous if left entirely unchecked. They never once imagined that we would instead become something genuinely better than that. What do you think they would honestly say," she asked, "if they could somehow see us now?" Rivera considered the question carefully as he watched the mixed crews of humans and alien allies making their final preparations for the long journey ahead. "I think," he said finally, "that they would ultimately realize their single greatest fear actually came true after all. We genuinely did become everything they always thought we might become. We simply proved, in the end, that what they feared most was actually precisely what the wider galaxy truly needed all along. The assembled ships finally disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them the collective hopes and dreams of 93 distinct species toward ancient mysteries that had patiently waited millions of years to finally be solved.